Childe or Tartaglia is an extremely unique character, which takes some level of understanding to fully master. Although he is a bow user, rotations rarely use this. His charged attacks apply the Riptide status to enemies. A fully charged aim shot that hits an opponent affected by Riptide deals consecutive bouts of O, known as Riptide Flash. This also follows the default internal cooldown of 2.5 seconds or 3 hits. Defeating an opponent affected by Riptide creates a Hydro Burst that inflicts the Riptide status on nearby enemies if hit, known as Riptide Burst. This has no internal cooldown. Riptide O has a quadratic scaling against mobs of enemies that are grouped together. His elemental skill converts all his attacks into melee slashes, a small initial hit of damage dealt when used. However, its cooldown varies depending on the amount of time spent within his melee stance, with a minimum of 6 seconds. The melee stance will automatically end after 30 seconds of usage, if it has not been cancelled earlier. However, this should be avoided as it significantly increases the cooldown of the skill to 45 seconds. Ideally, you should spend 7 to 9 seconds in his melee stance, as the cooldowns would be 12 to 15 seconds, respectively. Hitting an opponent affected by Riptide with a melee attack unleashes a Riptide Slash, which deals O hydro damage, considered skill damage. In Childe's melee stance, his resistance to interruption is increased. Childe's elemental burst has 2 forms, a ranged and a melee form, neither of which have an internal cooldown. The ranged form occurs when using his burst while outside of the melee stance triggered by his skill. This has a large O and refunds 20 energy, a third of his burst energy cost. This is the one typically used in rotations, as it allows for better energy management. The melee form takes place when using his burst while in melee stance. This has a much higher damage scaling than the ranged form but is typically used for nuking. For either form of his burst, when it hits an opponent already affected by Riptide, it clears this status and deals O hydro damage. This is known as the Riptide Blast and is considered elemental burst damage. His A1 talent increases the duration of Riptide by 8 seconds. His A4 makes it so while in his melee stance, Childe can apply the Riptide status onto enemies upon critting. His utility passive is quite unique, the only one in the game as of now, to increase all party members' normal attack level by 1. Moving on to his weapons, his best in-slot weapon is his signature, the Polar Star, as it not only provides 33% crit rate but also 48% attack with stacks. Normal attack bonuses from artifacts or weapons affect the damage of his Riptide Flash and Burst. Other viable 5-star options would be the Thundering Pulse, which increases normal attack damage and gives 66% crit damage. The Aqua Simulacra, due to its insane 88% crit damage substat and passive that increases damage when close to enemies, which will be easy to achieve as he is a melee unit. An alternative can be the Skyward Harp, as it provides 20% crit rate as well as 20 crit damage, and a high base attack. However, the Amos bow does not synergize well with him as its passive focuses more on ranged attacks, which are better for characters such as Genyu. There are numerous 4-star options that work extremely well on Childe, such as the Iridescent Hunt, which provides crit rate and a passive that groups up enemies, allowing Childe to abuse his quadratic scaling. Mun's Moon, which increases his burst damage depending on the total energy cost of the party, and Rust, which excels at higher refinements. The F2P weapon for Childe would be the Prototype Crescent, which is craftable, or the Slingshot. Childe's best artifacts are quite straightforward. 4PC Heart of Depth is best, providing an additional 30% damage to normal and charged attacks after using his skill. Alternatives could be mixing 2 pieces such as Heart of Depth, Gladiator, and Noblesse. The 4PC Shimenawa can outperform 4PC Heart of Depth in a single rotation, however it requires Childe to have 140% energy recharged to sustain this over multiple rotations. The reason Heart of Depth is overall the best option. An ATK/Hydra/crit build is best, with M substats being beneficial to vaporize. Childe's C1 decreases his skill cooldown by 20%. This is helpful as it allows for more on-field time for Childe without suffering longer cooldowns. His C2 regenerates 4 energy every time an opponent affected by Riptide is defeated, which alleviates his energy needs even more. His C3 and C5 are quite standard, increasing his skill and burst talent levels by 3. Childe's C4 triggers an additional Riptide Slash or Riptide Flash against nearby opponents every 4 seconds, which have no internal cooldown. However, this can lead to complications while vaporizing with Childe, as these additional slashes can remove the Pyro Aura. His C6 changes rotation significantly, as using the melee form of his burst resets the cooldown of his skill entirely. Due to Childe's long skill cooldown, it is best that he is paired with powerful supports, such as Fiscal and Beidou in an Electro-Charge team, where Childe is on field. Another formidable team comp would be a Vaporized team, with Shi Ling.